So today we'll be looking at tables, and tables actually are 2D representation of data into rows and columns. A typical table looks like what you have here. This is a typical table, and if you look closely, it is made up of rows. Rows are horizontal spaces running through your table. Like you have this one, you have this one. These are rows. And then you have columns. Columns are the vertical spaces that are running through your table, not the lines, the spaces. The vertical spaces running through your tables are called columns. Now, when the columns and the rows meet, they form these little boxes called the cell. They form these little boxes called the cell, or these little boxes that you see here. They are called cells. Now, if you look up here, this is a horizontal space that is running, and in a table, this is called a row. This is referred to as a row, and this is a vertical line. This is a vertical space rather running. In a table, this vertical space is called a column. The horizontal space is called a row, and the vertical space is called a column. Where the row, which is the horizontal space, and the column, which is the vertical space, meet, they form a box, and that box is referred to as a cell. So you have the horizontal space running and referred to as row. You have the vertical space running referred to as a column. Where the column and the row meet is known as a cell. Now, don't get intimidated by any table you see. What you have to understand is the running of the rows and the columns. Let's see something here. Now, if you are asked the number of rows in a table, for example, as you have here, the number of rows simply are, this is a horizontal space running through this table. This is 1. This is another horizontal space running. 2. This is another one. 3. And this, the last one running, which is the fourth horizontal space. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 horizontal spaces running through this table. Therefore, the number of rows are what? Are 4. So we have 4 rows here. We have 4 rows here. And now, looking at this other table, how many columns do we have? The columns are simply the number of vertical spaces running through a table. So you have 1, you have 2, you have 3, you have 4, you have 5, you have 6, and then you have 7. So the number of columns here are what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So you have 7 columns. Now, look at this table now. Look at this table now. If you understand what I did previously, then you should be able to understand the number of rows and columns that we have on this table. So the number of rows and columns, let's count. For the number of rows first, we have this 1, 2, this space, 3, this horizontal space, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we have what? 8 rows in this table. Now, how many columns? Let's count. The vertical space is running through the table. You have this 1, have this 2, have this 3, you have this 4, have this 5, and you have this 6. So the number of columns here is what? Is 6. So it is safe for us to say that this table is made up of 8 rows and 6 columns. 8 rows and 6 columns. I hope you understand the concept of rows and columns now. Now, one funny thing is, after this simple one, Most times you'll be faced with this type of table for you to determine the number of rows and columns. Don't get scared at all. Just know that every broken cell you see was once complete. So how many rows do we have here? It will not be safe if I count one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. It's quite ridiculous. So one trick I have devised is assume that each line was once complete. So I will put my dashes here to represent them. Now you see what I'm doing. Let's assume that it's complete. Is this. So it becomes obvious that here we have one, two. Do you understand it now? So from here, let me complete it so you get the magic. Now, how many columns do we have here? We have one, two, three, four, and five. So you have what? Five columns. Remember, these spaces that are dash, that have dash lines with this star means that they are broken. In the original table, they are not there. But I'm using them to assume for you that they were once complete so you understand how to count your rows and columns. So how many rows do we have here? It will be proper for me to say, okay, we have one, two. Now I will use my ruler to complete this, to imagine that it completes one, two, three, four, five. So, and then I will do this, just my dashes to connect to the existing line. Just watch. It's quite easy. Try to practice along with me. So for my columns now, I have, I mean rows, I have one, two. Oh, okay. Forgot this one. Okay. So for my table now, I have one, two, three, four, five, and six. So I have six rows. Let me count it again. For the rows, I have one, two, three, four, five, and six. Six rows. As for the number of columns, I have one, two, three, four, and five. And that is how you go about counting and numbering numbers of rows and columns. Now, let me see some of that in here. Now, look at this. How many rows and columns do we have here? It is safe for you to say, okay, we have we have one, one, two, three rows. I mean columns rather. And how many rows? I'll do this. So how many rows now? One, two, three, four, five, and six rows. Six rows. You see there. So this is how it's done. You have one, two, three, four, five, six rows and columns. One, two, and three columns. I'm sure you understand how it's done. Let me see if I have another drawn sample. And here now, let's look at this. How many rows do we have? How many columns? As for the rows, I will have to complete this. Now, if you see, if you are giving this to do in the office, you necessarily don't have to use pencil to ruin the original document. You just have to imagine that every broken line was once complete, and that will give you a perfect understanding of how to count your rows and columns. So how many rows do I have here? I have here one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, and eight rows. How many columns? One, two, three, four, five, and six. And six columns. So basically, this is how um, rows and columns are being counted. If you watch, I did not put number of cells. That is because once you get the accurate number of rows and columns, the number of cells will automatically fall into place. That is because the cell is a derivative of the number of rows and columns present in the table. So far, I started by teaching you how to identify your rows and columns, and I told you that this is a typical example of a table that's made up of rows and columns. The rows are horizontal spaces, the spaces, not the lines, horizontal spaces running through your table, while the columns are the vertical spaces running through your table. And as you can see here, this is a horizontal space and it is called a row. This is a vertical space called a column. Where the column and the row meet forms a box, and this box is referred to as a cell. Is referred to as a cell. And then I use this to show you an example of how you can count your columns and your rows. So for your number of rows here, you have one, two, three, four. If you are asked to write the of number of columns for this, the number of columns here is just one, because you have just one vertical space, which is one, which is one. If you are asked the number of rows here, if you are asked, the number of rows here is just one, because you have just one horizontal space running through, which is one. And that is how it is for table. And I urge you to practice as many tables as you can. Try to draw the ones that you've seen me illustrate with, and also try to come up with your own tables. Anywhere you get confused, don't hesitate to let me know. I will look through the table and give you um, instructions as to what to do if you are getting it wrong, and of course encourage you if you are getting it right. I remain your your joyous facilitator, Sakawaka.